To episode 111. That's a bit of a special number for a special guest. Um, let's see. So tonight we're doing a photographer's portrait with Karen Waller, and I'll just talk about that number first, and we'll have a chat between the three of us. I think one represents the. So tonight we're doing a photographer's portrait. Oh no, that's me in the background with some YouTube on. Give me a second. First, and we'll have a chat between the three of us. One is what represents the so
all good, all good. We'll just let Paulie sort that one out. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, it's nice to have you all with us tonight. We're very excited to have Karen joining us on the show tonight. And first of all, welcome. And Benny, how you been going?
Yeah, good. Yeah, always lots of stuff going on my end, but I'm good. Very excited to announce a workshop with Paul later tonight that we'll get to later down at the beautiful Tscharke. But yeah, I'm missing Tasmania sorely. I was meant to be down there earlier this year, didn't end up happening, but I'm yeah, very, very jealous that you guys are permanently down there, and I can't wait to get back down to Tassie as soon as I can.
Yeah, no, can't wait to have you down, and I'm sure we'll get up to some mischief ourselves, which will be pretty fun. And been up to much else shooting wise?
Really just the non-landscape stuff, the not as fun stuff. So a fair bit of weddings, a bit of the sort of property stuff as well. Slowly working through my waves gallery that I'm currently trying to get out in the next couple of weeks. But that's just kind of been put on the back burner with some other work that's come through. But got to do what you got to do when you're being paid for it. And then yeah, this stuff comes through when I can.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things that people don't realize when you're sort of shooting full time, that often have to do a lot of things that you don't see on the profile to make ends meet. And so it's a bit like any other job, really. There's aspects to it that you don't necessarily always get your joy and passion out of, but I'm sure there's still that as well. But it is nice to have the landscapes to come back to at the end of the day too. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did a speaking tour through New Zealand once, and it was called Do What You Love and Love What You Do. So it's kind of like, as a photographer, as a working photographer, we often, especially as a commercial one, it's not always your personal artistic endeavors that put food on the table. But if you can learn to love the sort of aspects of the other elements of it, it can still be a beautiful thing. Like you can bring a lot of creativity and interest into commercial projects if you're sort of on top of your game and take the time to bring that in, which then can make it sort of really enjoyable as well. Yeah, sorry about this before, bit of techie stuff, but that one when I was thinking of one I used to study ages ago. I studied a bit of numerology, and number one is about leadership. It's about foresight and heading sort of ahead of the curve, and you add up the three ones, it makes three, which is about creativity and self-expression. So yeah, tonight, and I guess in particular is going to be a lot about that, about leadership, innovation, and creative self-expression. Ones that makes three, which I'm just going to change my speaker, so that might be what's causing the problem. Oh, maybe it's Karen's in the background. Gotcha. Are you hearing me all right, Lucky?
Yeah, it's all good. It's cool. Someone's just got the YouTube window up on the background. It's all good. Yeah, and so no, it's been a interesting time for myself. I was working on a big Australian Geographic story, and it's been pretty exciting to have that all come out. So the latest issue of Australian Geographic has a story in it about the Abels, which is the mountains in Tasmania over 1,000 meters. And yeah, I was fortunate enough to photograph some images for that. And that's been pretty rewarding. And the image behind me is actually in the magazine alongside a few others. And I was actually on a shoot to potentially shoot the cover, but unfortunately managed to fracture my leg. And so I had to be taken off the job. So that was quite disappointing. Yeah, I managed about 4 shoots in about 6 or 7 days. They're all overnight or quite involved shoots. So it was a little bit nice to have some respite after all of that. But yeah, it was disappointing to have that. But so the cover, I was glad at least that I could provide a recommendation for a location for the cover shot. So which was taken by Mark Clinton. So But yeah, really amazing story, and well worth checking out on the Australian Geographic website, or I obviously buy the magazine too. It's in there. Yeah, it's really very very good little article, that one. So yeah. So
I was going to say, I thought that that background image of yours is one of the new ones for this previous trip.
No, this is an old one. So they did
Okay,
repurpose a couple images. They would have loved to us. They did suggest that they would like us to go to the Western Arthurs where this was taken. However, basically at this time of year, it's really not a great place to go because of the weather. And we essentially, when I injured myself, I was hiking in over scree slopes in the snow, and so unfortunately, even though I was very, very well prepared with micro spikes and all of that sort of stuff, I still managed to injure myself, and so yeah, it's just not a great environment to be out in at this time of year, and unfortunately that's what happened. That's how it happened. But that's the risk that we take whenever we go out. It's just I very rarely get injured, so that's how it goes. But yes, it would have been nice if the story was in over summer or something like that, and could have actually been able to go into some of those places, especially with Louis, who was hiking with. He's the kind of world record holder, I suppose, or he's climbed 158 of the Ables in 158 days. So that's quite a big achievement to be basically hiking for almost 6 months straight, to be able to hike and climb all of these mountains. And I can tell you that a lot of them are incredibly difficult to get to and to climb, and they don't actually have any tracks. You're just sort of making your own routes and so forth. So quite a feat that he was able to do that, and quite a feat that I could actually kind of keep up with him on the way up to the top of Mount Anne, although I have to say I'm sure that he was taking it. It's probably the easiest he's ever taken it on a walk like that in his life, probably, but that's the way it goes.
How was it find that Mount Anne hike?
Yeah, and I've done it a couple of times before, but to do it with that much snow around was not ideal by any means. But it was incredibly beautiful, but unfortunately also not the conditions that we were looking for. So even though I thought it was going to clear up a bit more than it actually did, the forecast suggested there may have been a very small window, and as it happens in Tassie, it didn't actually eventuate. So there you go. But that's nice to be able to talk about. It was a few months ago now, but that's been pretty exciting to have all of that happening.
Awesome.
Yeah, Mount Anne's notorious as being the if there's any mountain in the entire Tasmania that's going to attract cloud, it's going to be Mount Anne. Yeah. If you read the logbook in there, it's about 80% filled with people that went up to see the summit and saw nothing. It's just. She's a fickle lady, but she's magnificent when she opens up. I did a solo trip up there years and years ago and managed to get myself slightly lost trying to climb Mount Anne, and sort of when I was sort of vertically climbing overhangs, I was thinking, geez, this can't be right.
The end bit's brutal, and it's the crux, or the hardest part of the walk is only 100 or so meters from the summit, and that's we was no point summiting anyway because it was so bad weather, but it wasn't. Yeah, but basically, we got to that point, and it was so icy and snowy that we were like, no, it's no point doing any rock climbing in this conditions. When I actually went to see the specialist about my leg afterwards, he mentioned that a relative of his actually fell off that point and is now paraplegic. So it was a kind of a very somber kind of realization of some of the efforts that we're actually putting into for these things. So yes, definitely not a place you want to get lost either. But I can see how that could happen. It's very these are not you see the pictures, but it's a very different story when you're actually out there. Actually, speaking of bushwalking too, I am doing a talk about bushwalking, or a sort of an intro session about bushwalking and wilderness photography over on if you just head over onto Sony Scene, or check in the email that we send out about the show, you'll see that there's a session there about it, and it's $15 for a bit of a talk around what we're up to, and how to get into bushwalking, and if you're looking to do any walks, or any tips on places you can go, all the equipment that you might need, gear selection, that kind of thing. So it should be a really good talk if you're interested in getting into that.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, look, you get bested for that. I am. Just talking about magazine articles, I don't know if I mentioned it last time, but the Altitude South exhibition is still running, and we've got a beautiful article in South Australian Life magazine. We're lucky enough to get an 8-page spread and another spread at the front. So if you're in the Barossa, which is Lukey's hometown in Tanunda, that's up for till the 24th, I think. And if you want to get a first edition, you better get in there, because we've already sold half of them, I think. I'm hoping to get over there in a few weeks back there myself. But I've actually been busy judging this week, fellas, and quite wonderfully the last couple of days, particularly doing astrophotography for the Australian Photographic Prize. So there's a digital judging which happens before the event itself, and it's kind of like a screening process. And then when they get to a certain point, the top 25 of the digital and the print awards, which actually just mailed my entries off just this afternoon, are going to be judged live over 2 days in Melbourne at the Photography Studies College in South Melbourne, which is going to be later this month, 21st, 22nd. I think it's that weekend. I'll just double check. But that's probably going to be the premier sort of print event in the country this year, is my understanding. We lost the appers, as it were. Sort of 21st, 22nd of July. So I better hurry up and book my flights and find somewhere to sleep.
Yeah. Should see a few of my prints in there, actually. Sent mine off on Monday. It's my first time ever entering prints, like physical prints, in a competition, as opposed to
how has that process been?
Yeah, good. It was a very last minute thing. I bought my entries on the last night, like that it was open, and madly sent off my prints to my printer, like in any spare second I could while I was away last week, and picked them up on Friday afternoon and sent them via courier yesterday, and was just madly checking the tracking to make sure it actually made it on time, because I believe it closes on like tomorrow afternoon for the print entries. So but no, yeah, I was really happy with how that came out. Just did 4 kind of different prints, and very keen to see how it all goes. And that should be good.
Well, don't show me, mate. And yes, in case you're wondering, you are in a lot of categories, especially in the Australian Awards, you actually, as a judge, you actually can potentially judge the category that you have prints in, but obviously you're not allowed to judge your own prints. It's sort of the caliber of judges and the training is high enough, and that, you're given the amount of respect and lenience to honor sort of the integrity of the contest, whether you're in it or not.
I was just thinking about how awful it would be if you did have to judge your own prints. I think that's
you're probably pretty hard on it. And I think it's kind of like, because the judges, they want them to be active working photographers, it makes sense that they're also the kind of photographers that are willing and able to sort of put skin in the game and be current and be active in the role of print awards in particular. So it's I actually made a point of not entering the Astro Awards at this particular time, partly just to keep that separation from a new awards, and also because I felt like this is the first time I've been asked to judge a specifically Astro contest, and I was a little surprised I got rang up by Andrew Campbell, who's a bit of a maestro at it, and I'm judging the Astro Landscape Awards, which is more the traditional sort of landscape sort of work that Luke in particular is an absolute master of. But there is actually a whole sort of deep space section, and they're getting in some of the top of the top pops of the guys that sort of work in observatories and do really high level deep space sort of stuff. So it's going to be quite fascinating to hang around those sort of guys and learn a lot of the tech talk and some of that deep space stuff in particular, what I don't personally know so much about. But it's going to be
deep space would be a real challenge to judge from a like, even myself doing a lot of nightscape work, I would find deep spacing very challenging, because it how much do you need to know, and how I think how hard it might be to take an image may bias how you view it, and so maybe that's not part of the judging criteria necessarily, but can you maybe
so I'll speak to that. I don't actually know if we're going to be judging that subcategory of the more deep space stuff, but Andrew did say to me, because there's a panel of 5 and they definitely make sure they have some of the highest sort of technically minded experts in the field that are on the panel, But sort of, Andrew, I've judged with Andrew on and off for 15 years at a national level as well. So he knows the caliber of what people are capable of across the board in terms of who he chooses to get on the panel. And he did say he wanted someone who had fresher eyes, and it is appropriate for someone like myself that might not have the deep technical knowledge of how a print is created. I still have more than enough sort of knowledge and skill to speak to the visual communication of an image, or the emotional content, or the design, or the composition, or the way the final image actually speaks to the viewer. And that can be in some ways slightly irrelevant to the process that's done to create it, because regardless of how it's created, if it doesn't speak to people or doesn't communicate strongly, it's not necessarily a successful image, even if it's technically competent. So by having a panel of people that can understand all the breadth of all those levels, then hopefully they get a very broad perspective of people viewing the image, and a very balanced view overall. That's the way I see it playing out. Like I judged the video awards last year, actually, and one of the reasons they chose me, I think, is to have a fresh set of eyes, and not necessarily someone that's caught up in the technical, but is quite capable of speaking to the communication and the narrative and the storytelling and the emotional impact.
Yeah, just good to kind of balance out that heavily technical genre with more of that storytelling aspect that, like you said.
Yeah, maybe that's like you were saying, the good part about it then is it's not just all about the effort involved, but there's also then a bit of a thought process around the aesthetics and the creativity in terms of composition and the presentation of it overall, which is it's very nice to have that angle.
Yeah, it's applicable across all. I mean, if you look at every single genre, it's the same. Like, at most genres, nobody will know, or it's not written down or presented to the judges what people went through to create an image. It's just the image itself, and if the image itself is standing on its own legs, then it's a strong image. If it's relying on a particular technique or something that took a certain amount of time, or a certain specialist expensive equipment, it's not necessarily missing the point, because that's relevant as well. And I guess people can understand when certain techniques are done well or not, or not done well based on the equipment and how they've been used. But at the end of the day, like an image is an image, and it's got to stand on its own two legs.
Yeah, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
Cool. So speaking of that awards, I do believe our guest has actually entered the awards as well. She's entered lots of awards. Karen Waller is our guest tonight from South Australia live, and I physically haven't managed to meet Karen until the opening of the Altitude South, actually, finally, which is quite surprising given how much and how many years I've been exploring and reflecting and acknowledging and admiring Karen's work. So what I'm especially appreciate about tonight, and about Karen in particular, is she, like myself, loves a wide variety of genres, and isn't afraid to sort of throw herself in the ring of something quite new. And she thrives on creating quite original, innovative sort of work. I see her as a bit of a leader in a lot of fields. And in terms of the fluidity and open-mindedness that she has, the way she applies unusual techniques you wouldn't necessarily assume would suit a genre, and she'll just go right out there and just get right into it and create beautiful, sort of innovative, quite original work, and not being particularly influenced by other photographers, kind of on purpose, and also having a background as a talented painter as well. Karen has a sort of a quite a different brush stroke, I guess, that she applies to her work, and she's a deeply creative person, and it's not really, I find, that common to find people with a consistently innovative, original feel to their work, regardless of the genre that she's in. And that applies across a huge range of genres. In fact, I had to ask Karen nicely to narrow down a little bit more to the landscape realm for our show. Because if you look on her website, she's a multi-award winning portrait photographer as well, amongst other things. And which, I personally do a lot of portrait work as well. So I feel like Karen's a bit of a kindred soul, and someone who I look up to in terms of just how refreshing and original her work just always seems to be. So didn't want to embarrass you there, Karen, but credit where credit's due. Good evening to you.
That's lovely. Thank you for all of your kind words. And it was really so lovely to meet you at your exhibition, which is really incredible. And yeah, amazing work and an amazing project. So yeah. So where do I start? I mean, that's such a lovely
where do we start?
introduction. Yeah, such a lovely introduction, Paul. Such a lovely introduction. Thank you.
Yeah, pretty open where we go. I think Karen, Karen and I had a good 40-minute chat sort of last week about the show, and I think maybe just to reiterate, Karen, and create a bigger picture of some of the things I personally would love to touch base on is obviously for people that didn't know, it'd be nice to maybe just get a little bit of a backstory on your relationship with photography, and you know, and particularly I think, you know, being an artist at heart and having spent a lot of time in other mediums as well, it could be interesting to speak to how your experience with other mediums weaves through or connects into your photography. Maybe some of the influences that have sort of washed through your work in terms of not necessarily photography at all, particularly could be in other mediums as well. And we talked a bit, I think personally, about the ups and downs of that creative process and the ups and downs of trying to create quite original creative work. And, you know, the challenges that you personally have been through sometimes when people see your work and then they go like, oh, I've never seen that before. I want to copy that. How do I do that, Karen? You know, they're just trying to keep that sort of originality and authenticity around your work and that fine line between praise and someone that just wants to rip off what you're doing. But if we sort of start maybe at the beginning, Karen, I know you've got about a few photos for us to share, and Karen has a prolific Instagram account, by the way, Karen Waller Photography. Yeah,
that's probably a good place to view a lot of my recent work, and you know, quite diverse images there. So that's a good place to start. My website is also another really good place to view a lot of my landscape images, probably less of my portrait work, but there's a few. I think there's a page that talks about some of the awards that I've won, which are sort of mostly around my portrait images. So yeah, and also like Facebook, I guess there's some work there, but probably Instagram's the place that I'm tending to share images on that kind of.
You get a sense straight away the incredible breadth and diversity of Karen's work really speaks very beautifully on the Instagram account, and you'll see you'll sort of recognize subjects that you think you know what they are, but you'll see a process or a thought process brought to a subject that you may not have seen before. So kind of we go a bit of a step back and maybe where do you live and breathe? And you know, I know you grew up in sort of more rural South Australia, I think, like my good friend Dave Dallenberg, who was looking forward to the show tonight as well. Actually, we'll speak a little bit about how you sort of brought up, and that will sort of give a bit of a context, I think, to your relationship to the landscapes that you photograph and where you're at with it now.
Yeah. Okay. So I grew up in South Australia. My dad worked in the State Bank. I lived in a lot of different towns in South Australia. Basically, I went to 7 different primary schools in sort of rural South Australia. So in those places, you know, they were quite vastly different landscapes. They, you know, from the River Murray to Mount Gambier and the Blue Lake, and Wirrala on the far west coast of South Australia, where the Gawler Ranges were kind of in the background of that place. So, you know, I grew up really living, you know, the 70s, grew up living in the landscape and really experiencing, you know, being in the landscape, yabbying, fishing, just you know, doing those outdoor kind of activities that really connected me with those places, and not just the landscape, but with the you know, with the wildlife and the vegetation. So, and the, you know, the small ecosystems, the macro things, the bigger sense of scale. So I think from a really young age, I was always, you know, doing things that involved being in the landscape, and it was always that kind of thing where, in the 70s, we didn't wear shoes. You know, we felt the landscape, we felt the rocks under our feet. And, you know, so it was a good sort of time to grow up, and we built cubby houses in, you know, in the scrub. And so I think that was really kind of fundamental to my connection with the landscape now. And, you know, the fact that I did experience really diverse places growing up. So, yeah, that was really significant. But I was also, you know, I was also loved drawing, and I was very much encouraged to, you know, by certain members of my family, I was encouraged to draw. So that was something from a very young age. So that creative thing and that connection to the landscape, and also just to the connection to nature. There were people, like my dad loved birds. So, you know, I grew up always really being interested in bird life, and you know, other members, like my dad's mum, she loved just gardening, and that really gave me a wonderful sense of nature. And so, yeah, there were certain people, just family members, that really encouraged me to draw and to paint, and encourage the way that I saw the world. I think, like, I can just remember my mum, we were driving somewhere near the Flinders Ranges, and she sort of said, oh, well, you know, the light on the, I think I was painting or sketching in the back of the car, quite young, maybe 11 or younger. And she said, look at the light, you know, the colour, the mountains are purple. And it kind of like, it really stuck with me, that moment. It was like, wow, you know, just perception and how we can see the world, and awareness, and, you know, creating an awareness of light, and, yeah, so, and space. So, yeah, I think that was, growing up was quite, you know, I had lots of freedom, lots of diverse experiences. And sort of from primary school, we moved to York Peninsula, and Minlaton was where I sort of spent my years in high school. So, yeah, that's kind of my background growing up. So I guess that gives you a bit of an insight into that sort of experience, and how that has kind of, influenced.
That's very, very, very visceral, and very hands-on, and very diverse, and very very supported by the adults around you, and their creative and perceptive relationship with the landscape, which is, I wouldn't say that's a particularly common combination of things, Karen, like especially from so young, and for you to recognize that now sort of retrospectively, to see the influence of that. I find it quite fascinating. I was almost going to ask, how did you go to that many primary schools? Like, how come you're moving around so much?
Really very difficult, Paul. Really, really challenging. One every year, basically. So, one primary school every year. Really hard to. I guess that's probably really impacted on who I am and how I relate to other people. Oh, you know, sort of connections and long-term connections. Yeah, I don't know. But yeah.
Yeah, we need to get a psychologist on the show for that one. Yeah, it's a very formative time, those years, and to have to constantly adapt and reconnect with various different people.
Yeah.
You're in quite a sort of developmental and potentially vulnerable space. That's it could have been that my first thought is that you'd learn to be a lot more autonomous and internal, I guess, because your environment's changing so much, and the one constant is you. So rather than relying as much on the outside to steady your ship, you probably learned earlier on to steady your own ship.
Yeah.
Internal place a little bit more, maybe.
Yeah, kind of interesting, because I feel, I guess that's sort of, I'm quite solitary, and I really do like that, my own kind of company in a way, and especially when I'm out shooting, when I'm in the landscape, I have to be on my own, really. It's a very solitary, introspective, desire that I have. It's not about other people. It's just about me being kind of, in that space on my own, and really connecting with the landscape and really feeling it, not just feeling, feeling everything from the smell, the sounds, the acknowledging perhaps the history of the place, like who's lived there before, seeing, some places you might find tools from Aboriginal people that live there, and kind of acknowledging all of those things when you're in the landscape, I think is really important. And that's how you really deeply connect, really deeply connect with a place.
Did you get much exposure to Indigenous relationships with country? Was that sort of a part of your growing up?
No, not at all, which is really sad. And I reflect on that a lot. There was this Aboriginal man that lived Wirrala on the far west coast of South Australia. The school was about, 2 classes, had the most freedom in that place, but there was an Aboriginal man that lived just out of the town, and he was the only person there. Like, I don't think he had other family members there, but he used to make sort of things like boomerangs, and he'd come into the bank, and my dad would buy these objects, or maybe he sold them to other people in the community. But yeah, I kind of always, wondered who he was and what was his story, and I've always kind of wondered, but I didn't have a lot of sort of connections with Aboriginal people growing up, probably much more so as an adult in recent years, definitely much more so. Yeah.
Is that those recent connections kind of changed your viewpoint of country?
I think in some ways, because I've been to places like with the people from, say, Adnamathna people out up to their homeland up in the Flinders Ranges. So I've really got to hear stories of their, not just about the places that are significant, but places where they may have lived, sort of like the reserve kind of situations. Yeah, were they reserve? Was it a reserve? Possibly, yeah. And the really sad, heartbreaking stories from some of those places. Yeah. So I mean, it has deep. Yeah, it's really been quite. I guess I was aware of a lot of the stories and history around Aboriginal culture and, white settlement and the really that history. But to have friends who are Aboriginal and to kind of hear it from their perspective, and to have places to be taken to places that are really significant to them, that's been really quite profoundly important. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I'll go back a little bit, Karen. Like, you talked about some of your first relationships with expressing your relationship with country being through drawing, and
yeah,
I know you've been a painter as well. Do you want to sort of talk us through that journey through these different kind of creative mediums and how you sort of ended up embracing photography as one of them?
Yeah, sure. So when I finished high school, I studied visual arts at Underdale. So I studied painting and drawing. So yeah, I guess I did that sort of degree, and when I finished, it was very difficult to, I guess, make a living from being a painter. But I tried to sort of pursue my work, but I don't know, sort of became interested in photography through having access to a Polaroid camera. And I really just loved the instant gratification of that camera. And that was kind of the starting point around my interest in photography. I had studied photography at art school. I had used the darkroom and done quite a variety of photographic work, with the pinhole camera and just SLR cameras. But yeah, I love the instant gratification of the Polaroid camera, and also just being able to manipulate the image, and again, that just being able to manipulate the image when it came out of the camera and draw on it and push the ink around. I loved that. but then I guess I wanted more control over my images. So you bought an SLR camera and, sort of then started to kind of go down the sort of technical, kind of wanting to know more about the technical considerations around using a camera and creating images. So yeah, but I think that the painting background, being a painter, I mean, that's just fundamental to who I am, really. I mean, I grew up making images, drawing, but it's the act of making a mark on a surface that really, I think, is really profoundly beautiful. I'm not doing that now, but I still kind of, the thing around imperfection and finding the beauty in things that are not always beautiful kind of is a way of, I do that through photography and through a lot of my subject choices. But with like painting, you're making a mark and it represents the touch of a person. It's their mark and it's imperfect. So yeah, painting and all of the things that I learned, the visual language, composition, colour, those things. I mean, I can't really extricate myself from all of that understanding and background. It's just, yeah, really, really, really significant. Yeah.
That's really cool to hear, because I came from like a drawing and painting background as well.
Yeah.
Like I did it, did visual arts for my HSC. Year 12. I did a few large scale sort of oil paintings and charcoal mixed media stuff. And yeah, all through primary school and everything was, doing but drawings and everything. I wanted to be an illustrator when I grew up, all that kind of stuff. And then the camera kind of became introduced when I was about 14 and slowly took over from there. But yeah, I feel I can very much resonate with sort of how you're talking about that sort of being your background and how that sort of influences your photography. And I feel like you can often tell when that is someone's sort of more background or introduction to the creative space through rather than straight into photography, get kind of having a background in that sort of more.
Ben, what's the giveaway with that? Like what would give you that inclination? Like, I can see they've got a different sort of background.
It's hard to pinpoint it. I think part of it's maybe just the approach to shooting. Sometimes it's the processing. Sometimes it's a combination of a few different things. Sometimes it's the creative ideas that get employed. And I think that's not to say like for people that come straight into it can have just as like just I feel like they just manifest in slightly different sort of approaches and slightly different styles. Only sometimes, but I feel like when I have heard that someone has a background in that, like Erin Babnick over in the USA, she's another photographer who's got a great understanding of history of the arts and all that kind of stuff, and I feel like that shines through in her sort of stylistic approach to color theory and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, no, really cool to hear. And, especially in your sort of expressionistic photos of the agave plants and stuff, which I'd love to at some point. It really shines through in that sense. So yeah, no, it's good to hear.
And I think, the other thing is like sort of that background in visual arts and studying, well, probably any kind of arts or, visual arts, whatever it is, whatever your medium is. I mean, you kind of having to, but I guess for me, I think back to when, you had an idea and you had to kind of work out how to express that idea through visually or through painting. And I guess that kind of helped in a way, because that sort of helped me think about how I might actually express an idea. Through now my chosen medium of photography. And so it was significant in that kind of way that I had to think about expressing ideas.
I would sort of assume, not having that background myself, that some of those processes are a lot slower and they involve a lot of pre-visualization and thought development and a shaping kind of process for an idea to come into form. And as much as I'm particularly drawn to that immediacy photography as well, would it be fair to say, and Benny, that there's a certain sense of deliberateness and thought process, and maybe even a deeper search for meaning that can come through people that have that a lot more deliberate background in the arts?
I think so. I think I can't speak to meaning. I think that can come through in any sort of form, regardless of background. But I think in terms of perhaps approach, and yeah, like you're saying, maybe taking a bit more time to create maybe a final image product that is not necessarily representational. I think it's more likely to be less representational style of photography. But yeah, kind of viewing a raw file as, you know, maybe the inception of an idea, like a drawing or a painting in a head might be, to, you know, a final result. With, you know, some, I know, creative work or whatever it is, or even in just in the field, you know, different applications of stuff. I think that's extremely vague sort of wording, but no, I think that, and I'll get Karen to answer as well. I think it's, yeah, it does sort of come through in that sense, and you've articulated that well, at that sort of pre-visualization and articulation of an idea. Yeah, coming from that background, you can sort of see the difference in approach at times, because it is different to the immediacy of photography for sure.
Yeah, it feels like it's more of a developmental process with a time factor involved and different threads that run through. Whereas straight into photography, where it's just bam, bam, click, it's a little bit different. It's almost like you've got to make yourself slow down and pull back, because if you don't, you're just going to go, you know, you're just going to be spraying and praying and hopefully getting something down the middle, which I wonder if, you know, young kids or people that don't have that background that have come into the modern realm of digital photography, it's yeah, you almost maybe starting from the other end. And I guess there's two branches, Ben. There's that deliberateness before you press the shutter and that whole process of time and thought. And then there's this whole massive realm of continuing that conversation from, like you said, from the raw material of the raw file to a whole nother level again in post-production. So there's two whole different mindsets and skill sets to continue on that developmental process. Karen, how do you sort of engage with those two sides of it? If you're going to put it down the middle and to say what happens before you push the shutter and what happens after, what's your relationship to those two sides of the coin?
Sorry, can you just ask the question again? Sorry, I'm a bit.
Well, it's a bit of a complex question, but if you're looking at your creative artistic process, up to the point where you push the shutter button, and then you look at the amount of your creative process that occurs or engages after the photographs been taken in post-production, where do you feel like you most sit, or how do you relate to either or?
Oh, look at it, it's both. It can be both, depending on what the subject is and what I'm shooting and how much I've thought about the particular idea. So it can vary. I mean, some of my sort of more abstract images with the agave, it might be, it's sort of unfolding as I'm shooting, I'm seeing it, and then it might be about just finding the image that really works once I view all of the images, and there might be a lot of images, but it's kind of knowing that having an idea and a thought, but still taking a lot of images to actually realise what it is I'm trying to communicate. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I've answered the question. There's
it'll come through naturally, because when we finish this particular thread, we'll start looking at some images so it becomes a bit more real for people. But for me, like some people don't say a word until they know what they want to say. And there's somebody like me that I'll keep talking until I figure out what I actually want to say in the end. And it's same with photography. My process, I shoot until I finally figure out that's part of my process. Rather than somebody like John Voskis that might not shoot for an entire week and carry his camera around until the actual final moment is finally there, and then he'll press the shutter. So it's a different process. I don't think there's one right or wrong. I certainly know which one fills up hard drives a lot faster.
And I mean it's both of those approaches, and it definitely sort of is. It depends on the subject or what ideas you have. What ideas you're trying to sort of express, if you kind of have a really clear idea beforehand. So I think both approaches are how I work. Definitely, So
having a look at some images and speaking about that process.
See how
we go. Otherwise, There you go. If you can
I'm
either show
happy
yours.
to talk about them because I just wanted to just quickly like go back to sort of art school and some of the painters that sort of influenced me at the time, some of the landscape painters. And, you know, people like Fred Williams and John Olsen, you know, this is going back to sort of the 80s. I mean, they were still painting like earlier than that, but, you know, they're sort of, the way that they told the story of the Australian landscape and how it was so different to, you know, really conventional images of the Australian landscape. And, it, you know, it communicated the space and the light and the, you know, the emptiness and the vastness and, you know, also some of the perspective looking down onto the landscape, which really, I think that really resonated with me, the negative space and sometimes just the restraint around those landscapes. I think that really, you know, those images of, and even, you know, even like Brett Whiteley and his kind of more urban sort of images and beautiful images of mark making and drawing and the lines being sort of evident. So I think some of those painters, you know, come with me to the present and the way I see the landscape in the landscape now. So yeah.
Will I quickly share my screen just to quickly show that couple of those painters? I just got
I was actually hoping that's what you might have been doing in the background there. I saw the screen flashing away and I was like, oh, I hope he's doing that.
So
I need to be educated. Well, I'd like to be educated.
Well, I mean, there's, you know, and they were.
Let me just get this sorted. Here we go, Fred Williams.
Zoom inception.
Yes. Beautiful, minimal, you know, so minimal, so much restraint, but stories, really beautiful stories around the Australian landscape. And I guess a new way of looking at the Australian landscape. I mean, you know, these images probably go back to the, look, I think he died.
60s.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's some of his paintings in the Adelaide Art Gallery. Oh, you guys are not in Adelaide, but I think, you know, everywhere, all of the galleries, you would probably see some of his work.
My first time seeing these. These are fantastic.
Yeah, so, you know, like just so.
That looks like an aerial.
Some of the, it does. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, so some of those things really. But
that looks like it could have been on the last episode with Tim and David and Paul.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, he was quite young when he died, like he was only in his mid-50s. Yeah, and John Olsen, well, he died just recently. You know, these beautiful, almost, again, these almost aerial images, these, you know, it has a very sort of, you know, Aboriginal kind of feel to some of his work.
Very, like, really interpretive and expressive.
Like, yeah. He only died a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
So
that's right. I saw that in the news. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, this is a really cool one here. Oh, fantastic. Oh, they're great names to throw out there. Thanks for that, Karen.
Yeah. So I mean, there are a couple of so there's sort of that landscape, those landscapes that those guys were creating, and kind of changing our perception of what, you know, how we saw the Australian landscape, I guess. Yeah. So, yeah, the space, the light, the sparseness, the dryness, all those things. Now, okay, so you want to have a look at some images now.
Yes, please.
Sure.
It's going to be interesting. I'm not sure how to do it. I may. Let me just try and.
Yeah, just looking for that green share screen button.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just share the screen.
And if you've got any problems, I'll just fire up the website or something.
Yeah. Okay, so if I bring this up and I'll just put it into a different, sorry.
No, sorry, this is perfect. Looks great.
Okay. Now, do I need to, let me just see if.
Down at the bottom
start slideshow or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just change it to slideshow. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Beautiful. That's good. Okay. So, okay, I'll just go. I've got a selection of images here.
Yeah, take your time, Karen. Like, it'd be interesting to speak to. We talked a lot about your influences,
Yeah,
from your childhood to the different
yeah.
mediums, to the different artists, to different people. It'd be interesting to, and knowing the thoughtfulness behind your work, it'd be interesting to sort of check in. Yeah, I guess some photos can be spontaneous and intuitive, and some can be thought out, and some can have a real deeper meaning behind them that people may not see initially. So it'd be lovely to hear you kind of weave your thoughts around these images, so we can, as an audience, get to pick up on a little bit more.
Sure. I just wanted, one of the things I just wanted to talk about quickly was in, I wasn't really, shooting portraits, and my dad passed away in 2000, so 2015, and it was really quite traumatic thing to experience, but I was quite overwhelmed with the grief and quite surprised by how that affected me. And it was actually going into the landscape that was, and, shooting in the landscape, that was when I kind of started doing some landscape work particularly. But yeah, it was really a place where everything, all of the internal kind of noise and dialogue just sort of quietened down. And it was kind of, in a way, connecting me with my dad, because from my dad I had that appreciation of, wildlife and birds. So that was a pretty significant factor in me starting to investigate landscape photography. So this image was captured on over on Eyre Peninsula, it's called Murphy's Haystacks, but yeah, just beautiful structures.
I really would love to get there myself. It looks like an incredible place. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
you haven't been there, Lucky?
No, it's a bit out of the way. If in for South Australian standards, it's a bit of a drive to get over there.
Oh no, Luke, that's not that. That's not, no, Luke. It's relatively pretty easy to get to. Yeah, you can do that, Luke. But they're beautiful. I think it would be amazing for astrophotography, Luke. That would be incredible. Yeah, if you could. So, this looks nothing like the original image, but post-production and, look, they're beautiful red granite, ancient boulders, but just the form. I mean, they almost have this quality of, they're almost like alive. They're almost living sort of little forms, which I really love. So yeah, that's kind
interested. Do you have an infrared camera? It just has very much like that quality to it.
Yeah, doesn't it?
No, just post-production, and I guess, yeah, just kind of really sort of one of those highlights on the top of the rocks to, really stand out. So, kind of could.
Black and white mix. I was just going to say, is it like a lifting of the reds and oranges in the black and white?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's right. Probably some of that, Ben, definitely. But yeah, just the simplicity of those forms, and it really kind of was drawn to those.
What was it? What would the colour have been? Is that on grass? Is that on rock? I'm trying to think.
Yeah, it's grass. Oh yeah, there was some sort of grass, or just short, grass.
Yeah, I mean, colour can be wonderful, but it can be such a distraction.
Yeah.
Well.
And they're quite, and I mean, a lot of the images that you see of them are in colour. So, I really wanted to present a different kind of view of these amazing forms. So
it just highlights their sculptural form so well. They really are sculptural, especially that. I love that one, sort of the left middle. Just this sort of, I don't know, ear, like bunny ear sort of shape, or all that.
I really like this one on the right hand side. It's almost like a little figure just leaning into.
Yeah, that it looks like a little penguin or something, or
a bushka doll.
Yeah, bushka doll. It has a very figure-like feel to it, like a persona.
So it kind of has, it's sort of these hard things, but they almost have this kind of human softness. Yeah. So that Murphy's Haystacks on Eyre Peninsula. So a couple of years ago, I'm not sure, I can't remember, probably about 2019 or 18, there were some bushfires on southern York Peninsula. So that's kind of where I grew up from high school, and that's where I go back to. That's where I do a lot of my work now, because it's sort of easy for me to access places. But yeah, there was a bushfire, and I went like a couple of weeks after the fires, and like there was just this wind, this just terrible, and it was quite terrifying because all of the dust and the topsoil was just blowing up into the atmosphere. I was just on this road on my own. It was quite apocalyptic, and I don't know if you can kind of get a sense of that in the image, but yeah, just the form of this tree. Yeah, it was just quite beautiful.
It does look apocalyptic, like just the silhouetted nature, the blown over fences.
Yeah.
It looks like the aftermath of an atomic bomb. Like it's it does look apocalyptic, and you've done a fantastic job of capturing that. And I don't know if it's the natural color, if it's a deliberate choice in the toning, but the sort of brownish.
Is, well, there was some.
Really
yeah, I mean, there was that sort of color, but I think I probably accentuated that sort of color to. Well, it was. I mean, there was that color in the atmosphere because of all the dust and the soil, and and I kind of like the space, the negative space. There's a lot of negative space.
It's like two pictures in one, isn't it? And I really love, you've got the very dark black fence post there, sort of creating a midpoint to almost define those two sides, and the fence sort of helping to lead the eye in. So yeah, it's really, really fascinating image.
Yeah, and you got these elements that lead into each other. Like that's really significant. Like I think you might be a bit lost joining the two sides of the image together if you didn't have that tree kind of leaning towards the other side, and it's sort of that sort of desaturated, sort of monotone sort of feel, almost like it's life's being sucked out of the landscape is what it sort of feels like. And even man's attempts at trying to own the landscape, if anything, have added to destruction. I could see narratives of drought and climate change and abuse of land or all sorts of things going in. But I'm just sort of trying to. Is that a lighthouse in the background? What is that large?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it is a lighthouse. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's Port. I may get my facts wrong. I think it's Port Moorawi. Someone may correct me on that, but it's kind of in that area. So
this is actually on the coast
near Edithburg on the east coast of York Peninsula. Yep.
The nature of the photo looks like it's severely inland, just with the dust and everything like that. So it's quite a I don't know the word, like it feels oxymoronic to have this, have this desert looking landscape and then a coastal lighthouse right there. It's just such an interesting
it's unusual
play.
I mean, I guess that's the coast, that's the ocean, just sort of beyond that, just on the other side of where that lighthouse is. And I mean, these were all crops that were just destroyed, burnt. So
fantastic job.
So that was
I feel like that it's really important having that anchor point of that really dark one in the center there too. Really, it sort of holds you in the frame and gives you that middle reference point to sort of lead around all the image. And like Luke said, that leading line is really important as well. And just to accentuate that depth of that sort of soft layering that's present. It's sort of starting to get my judging hat on. I actually think I judged this somewhere. I seem to remember.
Oh, did you? Oh, maybe in New Zealand.
Yeah. I think
I don't know. You might have probably judged a lot of my images, but I mean, the experience of being there. That's what I'll never forget. I'll never forget how I was actually quite terrified being on my. That I love the solitude and being on my own in a place, but I felt probably more alone than I've ever felt in my life, just on that road and what was happening around me, because there's also wind turbines sort of in the other direction, and it was incredible. But anyway, that's York Peninsula after a pretty horrendous sort of time for the local people. So I was photographing, taking photos of salt lakes, and I was just sort of ground level, not aerial images, but just kind of interested in sort of the reflections and just the form of some of the dead trees.
It's already so strong as an individual image already, and yet it turns it into almost a kaleidoscope, creating the mirror, and gives all this extra breathing room to walk around the frame. And sort of play with those textures and gives you more of a circular kind of path to follow, which would be more linear if it was just the one. But and you've got to wonder what this pathway is through the middle. You know, is it water? Is it spirit? You know, what's the separation? And,
I'm baffled.
So this image is actually inverted in Photoshop. So it's like a negative, and I thought that worked quite well. It probably really brought the form out of those trees. Sometimes that I'll go down that path, and sometimes it's very successful, sometimes not. But that's just a sort of a creative tool, and it really brings out perhaps some of the details that may not look very interesting just in its normal form, but just the sort of details and the are quite
So what's your thought process with creating an image like this, Karen?
Well, I probably was, I love the forms of the trees and the negative space, but maybe I was just not liking the detail of the trees in the background, not really enjoying how that looked. So probably thinking, I'll invert it. I'll see what that looks like. And thinking, I really like how the details sort of emerge in the background, and also how those trees really become the dominant story in the image, and the details of the trees, are sort of much more.
Well, to me, that really subtle separation of tones between those kind of warm hues and that sort of soft kind of bluey teal in the background, it really brings that to life for me. And gives
the tones are really lovely, aren't they?
Yeah, really, it's the most divine hue. Like it really is. It's.
I mean, you sort of imagine the opposite. You kind of imagine what the opposite is, But in reverse, those tones are just quite beautiful. So, I mean, that's something I play around with sometimes is inverting images, and I still do that. And you'll see that later. Sometimes it works. It doesn't.
What's the texture around the upper and lower parts of the image there?
Yeah, they're just sort of. I guess they're kind of there's trees or shrubs. What would they be like? What are they? Like paper bark, what are they called? Melaleuca? No. Anyway, some sort of shrub that grows near the salt lake. I've forgotten what it's called, but quite a hardy, paper. Sort of.
And they're sort of like that. If you just separate out the trees themselves, and that you can see almost like the influences of Fred and John's work, like you just showed before, like sort of coming through a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, look, I was always, really drawn to, your work, your beautiful work, Paul's aerial images. I loved all of those, the aerial images I just thought were amazing, but I didn't at that time, it wasn't something I was able to do. I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to go about it. So I was trying to do, still kind of do images of the salt lakes. I wanted to do aerial images. Well, that sort of actually came a bit later on, but I guess trying to create these images from the land but not have a lot of distractions as well. It was quite challenging doing. I found it quite difficult to do this subject, and then sort of.
What's the reflection about for you? What does that introduce? It wouldn't be there otherwise.
Well, I think it is that thing around reflection, and that the idea of reflection and self-reflection and all of that's quite a nice, quite symbolic. How does it in?
Well, I mean, you already said it. But...
It's a very good question, Paul. Well, it adds to the composition, and it just adds another level of interest to the composition. It makes you kind of think about what's going on. you know, the what kind of reality are we looking at, I think. I do like the idea of reflection, and from that sort of point of view of self-reflection as well. It's quite nice. Yeah, I don't think I really answered the question, but it's a very good one.
There's no obligation to answer any questions at all. Just kind of be what you're interested, or what kind of you want to talk about yourself.
Yeah, and look, I think, and you know, some of the reflections were quite perfect without having to do, say, long exposures. You know, I got beautiful reflections. They were there, so you know, perfect reflection. How beautiful. Whereas, like perhaps other images, I might have been better off sort of doing long exposures. Yeah, to sort of capture the reflections. But yeah, that was a perfect reflection. So yeah, and then I started doing some. I did a couple of aerial. I did a couple of flights with Paul's, not with Steve, but with his friend Dwayne, or his mate Dwayne, which was wonderful. But I actually kind of felt like I wanted a bit more flexibility around doing aerial stuff on York Peninsula and then I bought a drone. It was just easy because I'm always there. I can go out and do it in my own time. So yeah, this was one of the drone image of one of the salt lakes, Lake Fowler. So Lake Fowler was a salt mine, and there's lots of little divisions, berms they're called. So, you know, to, I guess, control the flow of the salt and the water. And that's my favourite lake. If you go onto Google Earth over York Peninsula, you can see all of the salt lakes. There's just so many. And even growing up, I wasn't aware of it, but now I just can't unsee them. But Lake Fowler, even from Google Earth, you can just see all of these structures. It's really quite beautiful.
I was just talking to David about going down there in a few weeks' time, but to do some of this work. But he actually said, "Oh, it's probably too wet, and all this might have been all washed out." Would that be the case, Karen? I was going to ask.
Yeah. If you want them sort of without water, like this is right, you know, just a tiny bit of water, which is the green kind of line. That's the water. Not the right time, Paul.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Not the right time. If you're going to do a flight, wait till summer now. There's been a lot of rain, so
more to come by the sounds.
Yeah, so you know, just sort of really drawn to the, you know, the textures and the especially like as the water recedes, the beautiful lines, the beautiful colours. So with the drone, and also with the drone you can kind of come in a lot closer, you know, more intimate kind of images, which can be quite nice.
It's very visceral, isn't it? You can just imagine what it might feel like if you're running your fingers along it.
Yeah. So when I first started, I had read this really wonderful quote on a photographer who I follow. His name's Robert Hecht, and he very much is about the philosophy around, now I have to get it right, wabi-sabi, is that the correct term? Is that how you pronounce it?
Something like that. It rings the right bell for me, so it should do the job. He had this wonderful quote about, and it wasn't his quote, but the quote was from someone who has written a lot of books about this Japanese philosophy. It's about the transient nature of life and change, but also about appreciating the beauty in everything, in decay and ugliness. And this quote that this particular author had written, and it was on this guy's page, it was about coaxing the ugliness out of the beauty. Coaxing the beauty out of the ugliness. And I just thought I feel like that's what I'm trying to do in a lot of my work, whether it's landscape, portraits,
coaxing something out that is perhaps challenging for people to see, whether it's around, say, if it's a portrait around, say, depression, anxiety, grief. And I feel like that's something that whatever I'm doing, that's what I'm looking for. And with the salt lakes, a lot of these lakes have been used as rubbish. A lot of rubbish has been dumped around the edge. You know, it might be on private farm, private property, or council land. But I mean, that's what they did in the past. But you walk around, there's beautiful objects that are rusting, and I was probably really drawn to those intimate things initially. You know, how things change and that sort of cycle of change with rust, and eventually they'll just sort of disappear. But it's also a harsh landscape. You know, you walk around and there's all these little kind of insects that are sort of embedded in the salt that have, and little lizards, and yeah, so it's a very harsh landscape, but it's just trying to find that beauty that exists within these places, and, you know, the colours, the textures, the lines, the flow. Yeah, so yeah, I found this, and I thought, I quite like that. Wow, it's very minimal, lots of textures, colour, simplicity. Yeah, you know, and that's not super, I'm not super high with the drone. That's probably, you know, just a few meters. I don't know, I can't really recall, but not super high. But, you know, you can have that opportunity to get those lovely sort of intimate captures with the drone. I find
like I haven't seen many of these sort of salt lake areas of outback Australia where they're not taken from a plane. And so it's interesting being able to see this subject, and you can actually being able to see the crystalline salt and all that kind of stuff, and the cakes, and the really, you know, a few hundred meters up sort of perspective. So yeah, no, it's a cool, slightly, you know, different, closer view of these subjects that I've started to see many photos of now. So yeah, no, really cool, and I love that little tree detailing, and that's really fantastic.
And you know,
it holds the whole thing together. What's fascinating to me, apart from the beautiful sort of interwoven texture through the whole thing, is this very feminine, soft, gentle color palette, and yet when you think about the reality of this landscape and what it represents, you know, it's harsh and stricken of all moisture, and we've got a picture actually of death in the middle of the one piece of life that's alive, and yet it's encapsulated in this lovely, delicate, feminine kind of context, which I find really fascinating.
So that, you know, I sort of saw this one, I thought, I like that. And, you know, Lake Fowler, I just thought I'd put this one in because it just shows the flow of the water, the berms, and, you know, just the intricacy of that beautiful lake. But yeah, not much water in there, Paul. So that's when you need to be there, I think, when you can kind of see all these patterns.
I feel like I can almost see like a ghostly skull left.
Yeah, I know. I think there's a bit of a and there's a bit of a figure if you turn it. Yeah, there's a few sort of figures, and I can see multiple. I'm seeing a few skulls. Lots of things. Okay, that's enough.
Like a form that, if you go back one, like a form that's from top down, like that's fallen down into the landscape with its arms outstretched.
Yeah.
Because I find it very interesting here how there's this kind of attempt at boundaries, and then nature's just pushing through and weaving over in and around them, you know, like they're not even there. So it's sort of this conversation of man's sort of desire to compartmentalize and control, and nature's like, I'm not going to have too much of that. My process is way more fluid than that, and it speaks quite beautifully to both, I think.
And that's nice that you can see that story. I think that's a really nice story, that, you know, that kind of duality between
it's a duality, but it feels comfortable in that conversation, like it's an expected one, rather than, you know, things are broken or you know, because there's a sense of deliberateness about some of those sort of gaps as well. But it's almost like there's an awareness of those processes by the people that created it. But it's also a very unusual composition, and it has a very curious kind of lateral curvaceous kind of flow to it.
And it's quite, it's not, I really like doing the top down stuff, but this one's not quite, it's a bit more, it's not top down from above. Quite
an unusual aspect to take. And yet it's still, we don't have that horizon to give it scale,
That's so kind of important, isn't it? To not have that horizon to create those abstract images. I'm just not interested in the horizon with my drone images. I did a few with you probably recognise this. I think this was at Whyalla.
Yeah.
So I did a few. I'll just go through these quickly. And often I'll change the rotation of my image to suit how I feel that it works.
I quite enjoy playing around with that.
Just interested, Paul, how many of your images are actually upside down? Just as a
you'll never know, Looky. You have to steal my hard drives and find the metadata. I was just thinking when I put in my prints today, Ben, I was just thinking, shit, what if they accidentally put them up upside down? And some of them it probably wouldn't matter. I was just like, because you just paper, and then there's a, and you're like, well, you don't know if somebody's going to put it up the right way at the other end.
You put a little arrow for this way up.
Probably should have done that, but I didn't. So,
you've got the label on there, so hopefully, if they look at the label, the
labels aren't on the print, but they're separate.
They're on the back. They're on your sleeves, though, aren't they?
Yeah, your entry sleeve should indicate. Hopefully,
I'll be there in person. I've seen it. I've actually seen images judged the wrong way around, and they're actually doing better as a result.
Yeah, wait and see if it's helping or hindering.
Yeah, I'll wait and see that it might be a quiet for the audience.
Look, I quite just like some of the marks in this, talking about painting, and it almost has a human quality, like some of those painters. So it feels like I'm drawing this. It feels like I've done that brush stroke. So I quite enjoy that.
And I think if you go back, like I think the most unusual aspect of that is almost like these charcoal blacks. It's like it's not a natural. It's almost like a repository for some sort of material or dust or something. It makes me think of one of those. What's that series with the magical dust?
Series with the magical dust.
It's and the kids that go missing and they get separated from their creature. It's a very famous kind of. It was just on Netflix as a really big series, but it was
Stranger Things. No,
yeah, it's kind of a little bit like that. It was, but it was this magical collection of dust and something unusual, and something about this, just feels quite unusual. There's this resting point for the scattering of material, and how does it get there? And it doesn't. That black in particular doesn't sit with anything obvious that I would expect to see in that kind of context and that landscape.
I think it's seaweed, just seaweed. This was from a plane, so this was so I think it's just kind of the seaweed sort of gathered in those little sandbars, and
it's a beautiful.
I've seen something similar to that on Flinders Island actually as well, where the seaweed gathers in those ridges. It just needs to be sort of pulverized to the right sort of size for it to. But not too many places in the world, I'd imagine, where you get that sort of happening. So pretty cool.
Yeah, just how dark it is as well. Wow.
Yeah, that one. That one that you're flicking over to, is that like a fish in a tank?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, in a bowl. So they're all of the landscape images. So did you want me to just talk a little bit about
just go for it, Karen. Yeah.
Okay, so. I was really interested in exploring long exposures and movement, capturing movement and, time. It's about time, capturing time and the transition of time and the fleetingness of time. And I started off sort of with fish. That was a few years ago now, but, I really just kind of loved the minimal Japanesey kind of flow, loved it. Did lots of fighting fish as well, so beautiful blues. But, that was sort of one of my early ones.
We go back, Karen, did you sort of separate out the background or do you shoot it in a way like I'm trying to
I think I shot it in a bowl, a white bowl. So, there would have been some editing to, kind of clean it up. But, so just in a bowl, so looking down.
Down, okay.
Yeah, so from above, yeah, just had the fish in a box.
Such a great sense of movement. Like
yeah, it has a very upright feel about it, rather
than,
than,
I suppose, yeah.
Yeah,
and maybe
like it makes sense now that you say that, but like my first instinct was that for some reason, you're looking straight at it and it's swimming upwards or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like
maybe I was positioned. Oh, well, I'm pretty sure I had so this was with a tripod, so it wasn't. So the fish was moving, it wasn't me moving the camera, which I will come to next when I talk about that. So yeah, camera, like tripod, the fish is the moving object through the frame. And maybe it was slightly on a little bit of an angle, but yeah, it does have that sort of feel. But yeah, it's just kind of capturing the spirit of the fish, I guess, is what I was really kind of looking for. And so during COVID lockdown, when we were in South Australia, it wasn't for very long. It was probably a couple of weeks maybe. But, I still was needing to kind of create images and started photographing agave plants in my garden. And, from that, I really persisted and really pushed the ICM technique. So for those people that don't know, intentional camera movement. So, I'm using the camera, using a long exposure. Well, long could be, it could be half a second. It's not so much the length that's important, but it's the movement and how quickly you move the camera during the exposure. So handheld, you're moving. So the agaves were really wonderful because they've got that lovely light line around the edge, and, so you're moving it through the exposure. And I did hundreds and hundreds of images, and over a period of, well, it's been probably a few years, I just kept going back to it, repeating it, trying to find new ways to tell the story of this humble garden. Succulent.
Karen, that line you're talking about on the outside, does that come from a little bit of backlighting, or is it just innately sort of there?
It does sort of light around the edge, but there is some post-production that I did as well, so to kind of really enhance that feeling of that light. But it is there.
Yeah,
it does exist. Yeah. So
is it like to get that kind of, because it almost looks like it could be a multiple exposure as much as a ICM.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It does look like it could be a multiple exposure.
It feels like a few poised movements rather than one long fluid
exactly.
movement.
Yeah, that's what I did. Yeah, so it may have been. So those experimenting with, like, within that exposure, what can I stop within that exposure and freeze it like a multiple exposure? Yeah, which that's sort of what I did as well, so
a longer exposure and you're stopping moving.
Yeah, so, really, it happens very quickly because it might have been, less than a second perhaps, but that was sort of what I was doing. So it does look like a multiple exposure, but it's actually a single capture.
Does it matter what kind of focal length you use?
I found that using a wider focal, just say I was using 24-70, I found that was much easier, more successful than, say, using the other one I was using was 105, just because you do get a sharper, much sharper image with the wider lens. Yeah, so it was less successful with the longer lens.
Do you tend to stop the aperture down a little bit, or?
Yeah, I did. Look, I'm not a super technical person, and I just would go as far, because I'd go out in the afternoon, late afternoon. So when the sun was going down, so I would wait until there was less light. But just aperture, so smaller aperture as I could get, an ISO, go right down.
Shooting outdoors without controlled lighting, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so it's just basically with my camera, available light, late in the day, so that I can get the ISO as low as possible, aperture, highest f-stop number, smallest aperture, and shutter speed, down to kind of between, half to a second. So I could do that without using any filters. But, you could do it with.
There you go. No excuses, everyone. Check out your back garden. It's a whole new gold mine for you now.
You just see the nurseries being overtaken with agave plant orders now.
They're everywhere.
That's
my favourite ones. I think this one was one of my
favourites.
Not there anymore. She chopped it. It's been removed. I was very disappointed. So that's another lesson. You don't wait. You just go out and you do it, because you know that if you wait and you see something that you love and you think it's going to be amazing, it might be gone tomorrow. So just
true.
Photograph it. Yeah. So I did. I was doing sort of the agave.
I'm amazed because I was half expecting these to be taken in the studio. Just the lighting of it, it looks very it looks like really controlled lighting with a dark background, but the fact that it's natural light just makes it that much more amazing, I think.
And and I did develop some really helpful editing, post-production methods as well as part of that process. So, and I think that kind of brings the images to life as well.
No, for sure. Also, apologies if I have any background noises going on. Just
no, that's okay. I can't hear them. So then, and I was just, again, sort of black and white colour.
If you showed this to me first, I would have had no clue it was a plant form at all.
Oh, really?
No, I would have no idea. Like, it could have just been anything. Like, I almost thought it could be material like translucent silk or something, or
reminiscent of those sort of long exposures of dances with sort of those light beams.
Yes.
People do like the sort of like waving those around. Like, it's reminiscent of that sort of thing, which is just I think the fact that it could be so many things is such a test.
I think in some of the other images I show you, there's more pronounced. Oh, like this one, for example. So this one is in a studio. So I've just used a single studio light. So, that's nice because it does freeze the actual subject, but it's still a ICM, it's a handheld exposure. And I think also, I've learned to kind of really control the movement with the camera. Because if you're not, it can look really terrible because it can be. So this one's nice and smooth. So a lot of practice, a lot of experimentation, and I can kind of get some really lovely shapes happening. Yeah,
it takes a certain skill to leave a sort of a crisp anchor point in a fluid image, because often, that's just lost in translation, and there's nowhere to rest on a print. I mean, it may be what you want, but here you've done a beautiful job of keeping this kind of delicate, crisp, kind of but subtle anchor on the top of the frame that just can you can always come back to through your explanation of the image.
Sort of. It's just sort of nice how the forms.
Do you mind going back, Chris? Oh, sorry. I was going to say there was a quality about that image before, Karen. If you go back, I have no idea. Like, if I look at that, if that is a leaf at the bottom and center of the frame, it's incomprehensible to me how it just looks completely translucent to this other forms that are underneath, when physically that's not actually the case if you were there looking at a plant. So that's why that's the quality of this particular image that I find astonishing, is the translucence that wafts all the way through to what's behind. I can't even understand how that's even possible, and I love that. So I waylaid there.
Yeah, thank you. That's nice. So, inverted. Same subject and just a slightly different movement, but an inverted version of that image. Yeah, sort of nicely echoes through the. I might have taken 100 images, and this was the only one that worked. But it's still being able to recognise that this is the image that is successful, or this is the image that has potential. So, that's really important as well. And then I had some ginkgo leaves that I found. So I sort of wanted to, and these were these ones, a really negative space is everything. So I sort of arrange them very decisively, and again, that's an inverted, sorry, hang on, go back to that, inverted image. So I sort of want to create this sense of, you know, passage of time, leaves falling, autumn.
Yeah, it's interesting how you've got that fall away of density as well, from heavier to lighter, whereas often it's the other way around, top down to bottom in traditional landscape works. It's normally the bottom that's heavier and darker and more weighty, and this is the opposite.
And that's kind of partly to do with the lighting and the inverted, you know, where the light was positioned, you know, there's the drop off, and then, you know, I've inverted that. So yeah, that's a factor, is how I've lit the image from an angle. So yeah,
so one particular thread at the top that is the entry point to the image, which really sticks with me too.
And Paul, you know, look, I've changed the orientation of the image as well, so that it was probably horizontal. I just wanted it, I felt that it worked vertically.
Yeah, it almost feels like they're falling a bit at the bottom, like, you know, as
yeah. Well, that's nice. I guess that's sort of what I wanted to sort of capture, that sense
kind
of
falling. Almost makes a tree shape, which is you know, not bad for leaves, I suppose.
Yeah, good point. Looking and their separation, you know, it gives that sense of they're falling apart or drifting away from each other as they get lighter.
Now
this would be interesting. That'll be an interesting image if it comes up in a competition on a judging panel. Yeah, I'd love to be on that.
Just forget everything you've seen tonight, Paul.
Oh no, I'm quite.
I don't know what you know, but these things. Well, it's just, look, I have entered those awards, but I'm looking through, and there's some of my recent images that talk about what I'm doing. So they're the ones I wanted to share. So that there's
just to put your mind at ease, Karen. Like basically, with the judges, particularly experienced judges, are given license. You can say it's known, as if you know the author, and choose to continue judging.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Or you can, if you personally decide that your inside knowledge of who it was, or maybe the process behind it, is going to influence your judging in a way that's maybe creates a bias one way or the other, you have the right to step off the panel or not.
Yeah, that's right. Of course. Yeah, I've forgotten.
And even digitally, the last few days, there's even a choice to abstain from judging any image that you choose to, and there's no questions asked of a judge. So it isn't something that I would worry about.
Yeah, and look, so yeah, some more sort of forms, leaves, long exposures.
I love the sort of bronze tone. Leaves.
Quite beautiful. And look, you know, I would encourage people to go out and look in their gardens, because, you know, that's what I'm doing. I'm constantly looking at the world. You can't see sort of what's in my office, but there's a whole collection of birds' nests and things like, you know, bits of plastic, because I sort of want to tell some stories around these objects. But, you know, I'll go for a walk and then I'll collect these things, and they nothing that may ever happen, but I kind of feel that I may use them in an image at some point. So there's so many beautiful, like, leaves, just the simplicity and the beauty of nature, and it's just outside, it's there. And I really think that's really important for me, creating. It's just finding those things that maybe other people may just overlook, but just seeing those things and recognizing that they're beautiful is kind of important in my my creative process.
You're sort of introducing quite a lot of other characteristics. There's, you know, by your choice of lighting, there's simplification here. There's introducing movement, almost gives an alliteration of sound. You know, you're playing a lot with planar dimensions. You know, is this like a vertical, you know, falling sort of movement, and yet there's a crisp point in the middle that, you know, that separates the upper and lower kind of sections, and the fadeaways of sort of light, the wonderful luminosity that you somehow manage to pull through these leaves, which can't be easy to do. So there's a lot of factors you're dancing with, I think, Karen, that give a sort of understated complexity to an image like this.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah. So, and then, okay, so I'll just go through a few portraits.
I do remember judging this.
You probably judged
and
this.
It was a great debate, and it did really well.
It has done well for me. Single capture, so not much simplicity. And yeah, kind of just composition, just the cat about to step off the veranda is quite lovely. The orange green, the lines.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at that, independent of the figures, it's a beautiful architectural image. It speaks to a time with that little organic sort of grounding at the bottom that really sort of puts it into the context of what's in front of the building as well. And this I do remember that very, very fondly. This debate went on quite a while, Karen.
Was that cat totally unplanned?
Well, I mean, in some ways, yes, but I mean, I guess I could see that the cat, I was taking portraits of him on the veranda, but I mean, the cat was about to step off. So obviously I've kind of seen that moment and just captured it. So, perfectly that he's this person that's just, this is his castle. He's holding on. He's not going to let go.
Yeah.
He's going to die here. It's, but the cat's leaving the scene. It's just, it's
great.
Simple, but I think it's
pretty multi-layered.
I really like it.
Has a lot of conversation about culture as well.
Yeah. So one of the projects I'm working on at the moment is about aging well and sort of embracing or not being defined by your age. And this is my neighbour, Claire. She plays tennis 3 times a week. So, I'm using a long exposure, wanting to sort of capture the movement and her joy as well. So I think that tells a nice story of Claire at 88. So, so sometimes those things that you do in other genres and techniques you kind of learn, I can take them through to other genres and use them to tell the story. So that's been quite nice to be able to do that with my image of Claire.
You mentioned you weren't a technical photographer, but you're doing pretty well to sort of conceive of and put that together. It's really fantastic.
I was just thinking about how this would work. So I'm assuming there must be some sort of constant lighting and then a rear curtain flash to
just a single studio light.
And like the rear curtain flash would be key for that to get the movement up to that final kind of pinpoint.
I think it was like roughly a second, but the movement's quite fast. And just single studio light. And I mean, I did a lot. She's very patient with me, my neighbour, and and it took a lot to get the movement right. I mean, I didn't have a very...
I love that arc and the ball bouncing straight up to the top, her eye line meeting it. Like, there's so many great things that work about that conceptually and compositionally.
But lots didn't, though. People don't see the ones that didn't. But yes, I was lucky. But
half our job as photographers is as curators of our own work.
Well, I mean, actually, if you go back to the conversation we had, about a lot of what we touched on was your willingness to fail and the importance of that part of your process to be successful is to have the courage and go through, the troughs and crests of not achieving what you want to achieve. I don't know. It's probably a good time to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah. Look. Yeah. I mean,
not everyone's comfortable with that aspect. A lot of people just try and avoid that part of the whole process, and you could argue that they're limiting themselves of how far they can grow because they're not maybe challenging themselves as much as they could.
I think it's definitely about being prepared to take risks, and maybe something doesn't work, but it's really amazing when it does. Or maybe you just have to be persistent and keep. Look, I could have kept going. I could have taken this image I could have just kept going until it worked. And I was quite determined to do that. I think I had her come back the next day because I wasn't happy, and we did some more. But yeah, I feel as though I have been prepared to take a lot of risks with my work, even from a really young age, from when I was in secondary, from year 12 when I was doing my artwork. I took a lot of risks, and I did as well at art school. And I don't know what that's about, but I think it is really important.
Well, I think that somehow there's a quality to your work that speaks to that makes it stand out, Karen. Like when you look at so much of the breadth and diversity of your work, there's all sorts of levels of unusual and innovative techniques and almost like experimentation that is woven through a lot of your work, and both the presentation style, the post-production techniques, the physical techniques, the technical sort of approaches you're applying to subject matter that wouldn't normally have that technique applied to it. It's sort of, from what I've seen of your work over a long period of time, is that's quite consistent. So it's interesting to actually hear that from the horse's mouth that has been the case with yourself for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
I'm trying to wonder what it is, why that's not so common. Why are people not doing that? Because it's actually not that common from what I've experienced.
Yeah, and that's
not consistently anyway, not across a lot of different genres either.
Yeah, I don't know what that is, what that's about, where that comes from. I don't really know, Paul, but I know that I've always sort of wanted to try and do things in a different way. And perhaps it's that I want people to be able to see the world in different ways. But for them to do that, I have to kind of create the images for them to be able to do that. I have to come up with new ways of showing them what I see or how I see, perhaps.
Yeah, you're a special one, Karen.
No.
What is that?
Thanks, Paul. I don't know about that, but that's very kind of you. So, and my neighbour, you might have seen this one as well. Again, same person, same neighbour, totally different image, I've had a bit of success with this image. And yeah,
I haven't seen this one, Karen.
Sorry?
I haven't seen this one.
Oh, haven't you? Oh, so this it was in Head On. It won the International Portrait Photographer of the Year award last year in the stories category.
Stories, that's right.
Yeah, so so that's kind of a story around vulnerability, the passage of time, the fleeting nature of life. This little bird that I found in my garden out in the front, and I was so kind of heartbroken when I found it, because it just had these soft little feathers, and I had to keep it, and I had to honor it in some way, and so this was the story, Claire reflecting on the fleetingness of the life of this little bird. And she's lived a long life, and she's lived a happy life, a good life, she would say. And just the way the little feet sort of are echoed through the position of her hands is really quite lovely, I think. So yeah, so that's Claire.
Very provocative, emotional image. It really is beautifully handled.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's sort of,
the lighting on your hands is magnificent too. Like there's so much form.
The grittiness of the stained sort of tabletop as well. Like I think rather than having this perfect smooth clean sort of table and background, like bringing in some grit into the textures of the photo just really adds to that as well.
Yeah, that's it's a map, an old map, a stained old school map you know, I put that on the top, which is quite, you know, just all those colours and textures and the history, the story is, yeah, that's quite lovely as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, so
well done, Karen, and well deserved.
Very much.
So this is sort of a recent image.
Oh wow.
Condensation story, my daughter.
Is that all? Is that just a single frame capture? That's not a layering effect or anything, or
it is a composite. I wanted it to be a single image. Unfortunately,
technically impossible.
Unfortunately, when we went, I took her, but I knew I wanted to take the image of her. Went back there. It was too late in the day.
Yeah.
No condensation, so I took photos of her, and the light was much nicer anyway. So, you know, I was able to sort of do a composite.
Yeah.
And I felt that it really worked. It did work really well as a composite, maybe even better than with the actual light. Yeah.
Like technically, in terms of the face actually being able to show up through the drops, it might just not even work. So
yeah,
it's the clarity would be totally lost.
Yeah, well, it's because I took some photos of a couple of just a couple of people that were walking past. I just said, you know, I just want to try, and you know, it didn't really work. This was the first when I took the original image, so yeah, I think it was more successful as a composite. But yeah,
there's a few reminders just on these last 3 or 4 images in particular, just how much material is in and around your home and your garden. That you can play with. We all have windows, and we all have gardens, and we all come across, you know, creatures that passed away and leaves that have come up. Like the material is all around us. It's just a matter of finding the story with them, and in your case, you know, quite elaborately sort of bringing them together in ways that few people do.
Yes, I think that's right. The material is everywhere.
You mentioned earlier, Karen, how you're sort of always looking, and is that something that you've kind of always done, or you've trained yourself to do, or do you have any, for those out there that are trying to have a bit of a mindset shift, do you have any kind of recommendations or any sort of strategies around that?
Yeah, look, I probably, it's probably more something that I have done later in my life. Maybe more recently with photography, but I probably have always done it. Perhaps always, when I've been creating, I've probably always sort of been looking at the world and considering ideas or how I might use something later on. Yeah, I don't know. Other people do other people do that? Are you always looking? Always saying you must.
I think mine would explode if I was always looking. I don't know if I would know how to stop. So I have to kind of. I'm like
example of that.
Approach it like a switch. Yeah.
Example of that, because it is like if it's on the whole time, it's overwhelming. It's too much. Like when you landscape photographers driving a car is a great example of that. So you're in a car with people that aren't photographers who don't give two hoots. And you're just seeing stuff left, right, and centre. You want to stop every 5 minutes, and you're trying to get somewhere in time. Yeah. You actually have to train yourself.
That's why passenger, isn't it?
Yeah, you have to train yourself to switch off, or you go insane. You know, it's sort of it's partly why sometimes you've got to be on your own and have a bit of space and room to let your process come to light.
Look, I'm sure I'm not necessarily doing it when I'm asleep or watching telly and switching off, but when I'm, if I'm outside and just in the world, it's pretty constant. What advice would I give to other people? I mean, and because I'm shooting in so many different genres, there's so many things that I see potential with in terms of subject matter. So I could look at the ground and see a leaf and think, that could be amazing. So I'm not just thinking about landscapes. Where you might have to travel to those places to access them. It's everything that I'm seeing. So I guess it would depend on what you're shooting, what your interests are, what sort of stories. Yeah, you can.
When I look at this image, I think about those landscape elements. When I think about the shape of his nose, the light on the lips, the the curves, the simplicity of the lighting, the separation of the background that you've done on a lot of your other images as well. I can see that cross-pollination sort of coming through of traditional, natural landscapes to human landscapes, like this almost like, because it was in the landscape space, I can see almost the shape of the physical structures more in his face are much more apparent to me than it would be in a different context.
And it's a simplicity and reducing things to this, the simple elements and the negative space and the importance of the negative space, and just some of the shapes, I think, is really simplicity. Simplicity is key to so much of how we communicate, isn't it? And restraint, and that is quite a skill and a challenge in itself. So, yeah, I just had a couple, because I went to in 2019, right at the beginning, just before the COVID, just came back. Yeah, went to Ethiopia. Went to Ethiopia for a bit of a trip. Oh, yeah, sort of. I've just made that there because that's kind of important, that little bit of the composition there on the right.
Yeah, it is.
Kind of just, nice sort of compositional elements, I think, in that image.
And the shadows, speaking of the other people outside of frame that are part of the conversation.
Yeah, and possibly me as well.
There's just so much joy in those little faces back there in that previous
photo. It is. Yeah.
There's so much just enjoyment in such a simple thing. Like it's
that moment,
really, you've got shacks strung together with branches in the ground, and they're playing with this twine of rope, and they're just having this time in the dirt, and it's really, really cool. Yeah,
bits of rope that are just tied together and to make a long rope, and just simple portraits of people. People just.
If you go back a little bit to that last one, like, to me, like, this understanding of lighting and the particularly the separation of the background from all your other subjects, sort of, this is again speaking of that cross-pollination technique, and that's where Karen's particularly exceptional at, and she can apply a lot of what you may learn or think of as just a landscape technique can then be applied to a human landscape or other landscapes as well.
Yeah. What's the story behind this one?
So this person, he lived on York Peninsula, and someone said that he would be a great subject to photograph, and I didn't think that he would. Some people said he wouldn't want me to take his portrait, but he was quite open to it. Very interesting farmer, very intelligent, sort of quite solitary sort of person. And I took portraits of him, and just kind of this one sort of really, really resonated. And I've sort of, I think about 8 months, like, he really loved it as well. He loved the portraits of him, which was really kind of really nice when that happens, because you always feel a bit nervous about whether that's going to be the case. But about 8 months later, he died, and I think he had cancer. So I think the reason that he agreed to have his portraits, I don't know, I'm just guessing. I think he knew he was unwell, and maybe he thought this would be something for his family. So it was kind of pretty sad that, but lovely that he thought maybe this is a gift, could be something for his family to have. Great sort of face, great character. You
could spend so much time with this. There's so many places to go with how to read into his life story or the emotional landscape that he's in at the moment. Is it an intensity? Is it pain? Is it grief? Is it anger? Is it wonder? There's a lot of room to breathe here in terms of interpretation as a portrait. It's very powerful.
it's quite, but there's a strength but a vulnerability as well that I kind of like, that sort of opposing kind of strength, vulnerability. And I guess I have done a lot of work around men and vulnerability. So I had an exhibition and it was called Vulnerable Men. That's going back to about 2014. That was pretty confronting to capture those images and stories around men crying. That was a place that was difficult for me to be in with those people, but I felt...
To compare notes, Karen, I'm bringing the Men with Heart exhibition to Adelaide.
Wow.
So if you want to meet up and reflect on that work,
you've got those beautiful images.
We want to bounce off each other on, actually.
Yeah, okay, cool. Sounds great.
Just notice with the time too, we're sort of getting towards our sort of closing time. So if there was any particular images you'd like to show or talk about, then it's a good chance to do that as well.
I think I've done that. I think you mean me or someone else?
Oh, yourself, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can just, this last one.
Yeah.
You can finish with that one, Marty.
Great shot.
Just vulnerability and just that willingness to be so vulnerable, like that's an amazing thing as a photographer, that people they can share that moment with you. That's really quite incredible, and feel comfortable with it. I mean, he's quite a masculine sort of guy, but he was very happy for me to share this image and to be this person that could be so emotional in that moment. Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions about your portrait work. Do you typically like to use natural light or have some off-camera light, and also do you have a favourite focal length as well?
Yeah, look, I'll use available light and just a single studio light, which I tend to take on location because I don't really have a studio. Well, that one of Claire and the bird, I shot that just at home, but I don't have a dedicated studio. So just a single studio light, sometimes available light. I tend to use something just like around my 24 to 70. So it depends what I'm shooting. If it's sort of more of an environmental portrait, then I'll do sort of wider. Yeah, but not wider than 24, but sort of around in that sort of range. Yeah, I don't know. I used to do sort of portraits with longer lenses, but I think kind of like a bit of the environment in the, or 50 mil.
Yeah.
Yeah. So not really long lenses, and I don't tend to really throw the background deliberately out of focus so much. So much these days. I tend to like to have the detail in the background. Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that there's a lot of structure around the side of the faces, which you can lose when you drop away the aperture a bit too much.
Yeah. And again, it really suits this style of portrait where you're capturing so much detail in the face, from the tip of the nose through to like the edge of the hairline. All of that
you kind of.
It'd be a bit like going against the style of the portrait to have like a really shallow depth of field. So it works well.
I do like to have that, nose, that sort of depth in focus. Probably some of those things that haunt me from the AIPP days where, but I may not have done that. But good, good lessons learned from the AIPP. So, I think that's sort of all. I just wanted to Luke, I think we have a connection. I mean, your family's in the Barossa. I thought we were related, but I actually believe that both of our families settled at Ebenezer in the Barossa. Is that correct?
Wow.
I think, I've done a bit of research. I think you're German, but my family is from Germany, but Wendish.
Okay.
Then we settled in that little tiny community, our families, in the 1850s. So
no, it's way back in the day, and some people
way back in the day. So it's kind of nice to sort of think that I have that a bit of a connection.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's and especially in South Australia too, there's so many family histories going way back like that. So it's always nice to make those sort of connections. But no, it's pretty cool. Definitely miss some of that living away, but absolutely.
Karen, where's next for you? Where are you heading with your relationship with photography?
I'll keep going. I'm involved in an exhibition, which is a group exhibition of painters. I think there's printmakers and a couple of photographers. That's in the Adelaide Airport in November. Also, I'm sort of involved in doing small group landscape tours on York Peninsula, but it's sort of booked through a place called Ballara Retreat, which is in Waruka. So if anyone was interested, like just, a few days, go to Salt Lakes, coastal locations, whatever people are sort of interested. It's only maybe 2 or 3, a small group. And there's one in October. I'm not sure of the dates now. I thought I had that written down.
Do they contact you directly if they're interested, or? Sorry? Can people contact you directly?
If anyone's interested, just contact me directly and I can, point them in the right direction. Yeah, that would be great. So, kind of just tailoring it to suit people's interests. Yeah. So
I'd highly encourage anyone to spend a bit of time on Karen's Instagram in particular. It's very diverse and very prolific and just full of just creative wonders. It's kind of a kaleidoscope of wonders is how I describe it. And we've only had a tiny taste of some of her work tonight, but it's been nice to be able to slow down and actually feel around the images and get a sense of Karen's process and thought and experience and ideas behind the images, which you often don't get access to. And it's the beauty of a show like this. You're only left guessing when you look at an Instagram account or a single photograph. And having learned a lot more tonight, Karen, about your background, the very sort of deep personal, sort of hands-on, visceral relationship you have with the country of South Australia, and how much of it you've seen, and how much the landscape has been a very, very physical and real part of your life, and how you've sort of walked across all these different mediums of drawing and painting and the influences of other people, and how you've applied. What I found really interesting is, it's not very often we move into the portrait realm on the show, but what I felt like you could see the processes of lighting and simplification and applied all the way through. So it's almost like going from the natural landscape to the human landscape, and you could see those threads and the way you see and the way you like to present work and create depth and separation from background and amplification of a certain emotion was all the way through. And that's it's rare to see that applied across different genres. So that was a nice nice change for us landscape boys.
Absolutely. Variety is the spice of life.
And thank you. It's lovely to see your faces, Luke and Ben. I'm familiar with both of your images, so that's really special. And Paul, I'm very familiar with his work, and he's been an inspiration over the years as well with your diverse work, Paul. And I hope that people can get to see your images in Tanunda at the exhibition. I would everyone in South Australia should go up and have a look. How much longer is that on for?
24th of July at the Barossa Regional Arts Gallery. It's,
yes. Yeah.
A little bit to go. We're about to sort of wave the flag a little bit more. David's got a few big walkthroughs coming up on Friday and this weekend with some big groups, which should be good. But it's
okay.
Yeah, I know you've been back to it a few times, and
I'm going back to Tanunda Saturday for a night. I've got a few portraits lined up. So yeah, maybe thanks for your David.
Yeah, David's just around the corner, so you might be able to meet up with them and have a coffee with them too.
Give him a call and say, excellent. Well, I really appreciate your patience with me. And,
not at all.
At the beginning,
been a pleasure, Karen. Yeah,
it's been
really great to hear some insight into that work, and some really interesting like things that I wasn't expecting about some of them too. So yeah, no, been fantastic to have you on. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, pretty special, Karen. Thank you. I've been wanting to get you on the show for a long time, so I think we needed to meet in person before that was meant to happen.
That was lovely. So. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks so much, guys, and look forward to what you guys do.
Yeah. Well, again, Instagram, Karen Wildlife Photography, and your website. Just look up Karen Wildlife Photography. You'll find a website which is very clean and beautifully handled. I think just before we finish off, we'll thank Karen. Ben, do you want to make the official announcement for our upcoming adventure?
So before we finish up, Paul and I are really excited to announce a workshop that we're running together in November this year, 17th to the 21st. We'll be spending 5 days in the Tscharke region, which is a workshop that I ran with Luke last year, and a workshop that Paul ran with Luke earlier this year. And it's just such a special area of the world that we can't get enough of it. And especially one that's under threat from logging, it can't come at a better time to just, get an appreciation for this time of the world. So we're visiting some pretty special locations that are some of the best in Australia. This largest temperate rainforest in Australia, some of the most intensely rugged and raw coastline in the entire continent. We'll be spending 5 days in really nice key locations to showcase it at its absolute best. And we'll be staying close by and just having a fun time with fellow landscape photographers. Me and Paul be frothing the whole time, and we'll be there to guide every step of the way.
Guaranteed.
Yeah, it'll be, and it's also like the leader to participant ratio is like 1 leader for every 2 to 3 people, which is far more individual attention than you get in most workshops out there. So we're very much looking forward to it. The link should have gone out in the email this week, but if not, just go to my website, benmaysfineart.com, and under the workshop or education and workshops tab, there'll be the Tscharke Photo Adventure 2023, which you can book through there. Awesome. If you're struggling,
that was man. I was just, if I was just like a punter listening to that, I was just like, that sounds great. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm running it. And I was like,
no. Well, I mean, I was only just up there on the weekend actually, Lake Chisholm and the coastline there, and it's looking pretty mint at the moment. So I've never seen Lake Chisholm with so many reflections. It was like you didn't know where the reflections started. Actually, it was pretty incredible. So definitely can vouch for it, and I'm also really excited for Ben and Paul to be working together, who are both very dear friends of mine, and really nice to have made that connection there as well. So I'm sure it'll be an incredible time for everybody. So definitely check that one out.
If you hadn't already, like if you want to be on the email list to get insight into when the shows are coming up and what Luke's offering and what Ben and I are offering, then make sure to like and subscribe or get on the email list, because we've got some really good stuff going on, and we love the show, and your support is what keeps us coming back all the time, because we do this for the love, and nice to get some love back and some interest back. So and feel free to spread the word, and don't forget, for people that hadn't been a part of the show or seen it before, it's an incredible resource for the entire global community of photographers and techniques and places all around the world. So feel free to make the most of it at any time it suits.
Absolutely. And we'll put a link to our mailing list in the show description as well. So if you haven't signed up to that, it's a good way of just getting some advance notice of what's coming up in the episode, coming normally a day or two before it actually drops. Also next week, next fortnight, we're joined by Tabitha Badger, who is a really amazing environmentalist based down here in Tasmania. So very much looking forward to having her on, talking about the Spiro region, and also some of her own photography, which is really incredible, and some of the amazing advocacy work that she does. So can't wait for that one. So
looking forward to that, Lukey. Thanks for teeing that up, mate.
No worries. All good. Well, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks again, Karen, for joining us, and until the next show in a fortnight's time, we'll see you then, and keep on shooting and have a good one. See ya.
Keep up the amazing work, Karen, and maybe I'll catch you in Adelaide in a few weeks.
Thanks, guys. See you. Lovely to meet you all.
Bye. Good night, everyone.